So, Louise, thank you very much for joining me here live on TalkTV. Suella's gone to New York to say how this post-war 70-year-old refugee convention is out of date. Is it something you would reach for or refer to when trying to assist people who've come to this country?
Hello, Jake. Yes, absolutely. I mean, all of the substantive claims for asylum in the UK are made against the established Refugee Convention. I mean, that's really what centres asylum claims in this country. I think more broadly, if anything, the Refugee Convention is very narrow in terms of its definition of a refugee. It talks about people fleeing torture and persecution. There are some groups of people that wouldn't be covered by the refugee. For example, climate change refugees will find it difficult to navigate it, for example. And that's a growing area of concern. So there's certainly an argument to revisit that. But to suggest that we should reform it because people are abusing some of the terms of the convention, or that I think Braverman was going to allude to the fact that it was covering pure prejudice or discrimination, that's just simply incorrect. The Refugee Convention doesn't enable someone to claim protection on the basis of discrimination. It's very clear that it's persecution and torture.
Right, which is going much further than just discrimination. Of course, we don't quite know yet what Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, is going to say, but we are covering her speech live here on TalkTV at 4 o'clock. Stay with us for that. One of the things that's been briefed to the newspapers is that the convention, first post-Second World War, very, very disturbed time in the history, 70 plus years ago, would have covered about 2 million people. There's been this think tank, I think from memory it was the Policy Exchange, has come out and said because of mission creep, for want of a better word, with the convention who it covers, that could be now 780 million people who will be entitled to refugee status under the convention. And we understand that Suella Braverman is going to push the line that it now covers people who are gay and people who are women, would have a sort of natural, almost automatic right to claim refugee status because of their sexual orientation or in fact their gender. Is that your understanding of how it works?
Absolutely not. No, I don't recognise those figures. They seem to me to be a massive inflation on the actual fundamental content of the Refugee Convention. As I said, it is a high bar. We're talking about, it specifies people fleeing torture and persecution. That's not discrimination and prejudice. The reality is there are LGBT people fleeing torture. We know that in many countries of the world, being gay, a lesbian, being transgender is punishable by death.
Yeah.
Those people have a right to claim asylum. That's different from people that are discriminated against on the basis of their sexuality or their gender. Women in Afghanistan, for example, are in incredibly dangerous situations. It's more than just discrimination that they're suffering. Their life is at risk. Some women's life is at risk in Afghanistan. So I think that what we're seeing actually is Braverman massively oversimplifying what is a deeply complex convention. And we should be mindful that this convention, even Winston Churchill had a role in developing it post-war to digest the learning of the problem of persecuted people trying to flee Germany, the fact that they were failed by the states around Germany and most of the European states, that they were pushed back into Germany and were killed as a result of that. This convention enshrines that learning to make sure that we don't make those awful mistakes again and that more people don't die. The Refugee Convention is not a low bar. It is a very deeply serious international convention that Braverman is massively oversimplifying and trivialising down to some kind of woke instrument. It's not.
Well, that is certainly very illuminating. We heard from one of our guests previously that it has, in fact, been subject to updating on a fairly regular basis. One of the other things that the Home Secretary is pushing is this idea, and you allude back to the Second World War when, as you say, Winston Churchill was involved with lots of things, apparently this as well. Initially, the idea was that you would leave a country, you would go to another country and you would claim asylum there. Now, the Home Secretary is pushing back on this idea that people don't have to claim asylum in the first country they reach. That's actually the interpretation both the United Kingdom government and the USA government make of it, but it's been overruled. Would you support a reasonable updating, which she's trying to build this international coalition for, which would say, in very blunt terms, you can't be an asylum seeker from France and would come to the UK, you should remain in the first safe country that you reach?
There's very good reason why the Refugee Convention specifically permits refugees to travel further than their immediate neighbouring country. And the predominant reason for that is because we see regions of instability. We saw that in Germany during the Second World War. We saw the Nazis spread much further than Germany, and those refugees that were accommodated in the immediate neighbouring countries were indeed killed subsequently to that.
But
so
I don't think
you see regions of instability, but secondly and crucially, if all of the refugees have to stay in their region of displacement and they're not allowed to travel further, then what you see is key regions carrying the whole responsibility to support the world's refugees. And essentially, it de facto means that there is zero role for Britain in supporting any of the refugees in the world unless there's a civil war in France or Ireland. That's plain ridiculous.
That would be right if we hadn't taken so many refugees directly from Afghanistan and Ukraine.
We haven't. Well, we've taken 107 in the last year. Since January 22.
Well, we've taken a lot from Hong Kong.
107 Afghan refugees, Jake.
But let me put this to you. So I don't think what you say is quite what the Home Secretary is calling for. So let me just put it to you again. So I completely understand that if you people want to leave the region of instability, that's something I accept. What Suella Braverman, I believe, is going to call for at 4 o'clock live here on TalkTV is that when they reach their first safe country, so say that be a European country, that they claim asylum there. Under this current convention, they can live for several years in other countries and then decide to come to the UK and claim asylum. And she's only asking for a reasonable updating of it rather than ripping it up. And I personally think that's something the British people would support as a regional moderation of this convention, which, as I say, has been updated on several occasions already.
But, Jake, when you look at the reality of the operation of life in the UK, the operation of our asylum and protection mechanisms, regardless of what Braverman says, we don't have any viable refugee resettlement happening right now. The numbers are absolutely tiny of people coming through the Afghan resettlement schemes, and we have no border resettlement. Family union has dropped to absolutely tiny amounts of family reunion, and you can't get a flight into the UK without a visa. And we won't give visas to anyone if we think they're going to claim asylum. You know that that's the reality of our asylum and protection mechanisms. So if Braverman says that people have to stay in their first safe country, then that de facto means that none of them would be coming to the UK, because we'll never be the first safe country for anyone, because we won't resettle them and we won't give them a visa. This is just another way of Braverman operating anti-migrant policies, but dressing it up in some form of a veil of humanity.
Well, you may say that, Louise. Thank you so much for joining us here on TalkTV.